Living more in your head than living in real life. This is one of the biggest problems I see with people who are smart, ambitious, successful. They can have a lot of success in one area of life, but as soon as it comes to expressing themselves, whether it's in a social situation, whether it's with a woman that they're interested in, whether it's even with family and friends expressing what they want to do, but also boundaries, that is suddenly where people feel stifled, shy, and they freeze up. It's when they start to question, like, why did I even get all the success? Like, why is this happening to me? Other people don't seem to have this problem. Why do I suddenly seem to struggle when it comes to being stifled? When it comes to holding back in conversation? When it comes to relationships with their friends and with people that they're romantically interested in? Why is it that this seems so difficult for me? And it's right there where the problem lies. It's because they have an image that they should be something else, but they shouldn't, because they're not that person. If they were that person, then they wouldn't be having these issues. And that's totally okay. Today, what we're going to be going into is how we create this image, how we can affect change on that image. In other words, how we can take the good part of that image of being successful, of being ambitious, of being smart, how we can use that and leverage that so that when we do eventually drop the ego, not kill the ego, but drop the ego, we can get rid of all of the bad parts of what that image is whilst retaining all of the good images. Then we're going to get into the action protocols and how this framework actually looks like in a day-to-day situation so that we don't just appear more confident and we appear more social, but we actually becomes the guy that can't get stifled anymore, that can't get stuck in his head anymore, that literally is not the person where these issues affect them. So why smart, successful guys feel like they've lived in their head more than they have in real life? This is the cure to overthinking. Let's get straight into it. This is the table of contents. How the ego and the successful guy image were created. How we can leverage that because we want to make sure that we can get the most out of this success, because that is a resource state. 3 is how we can drop the parts that are not useful to us. 4 is the framework of what this looks like day to day. And 5 are your action protocols and homework for the day. So how the ego and the successful guy image were created. So this is through the hypnotic loop. I just made a bonus module in the Advanced Shadow Work Guide. It's all about the hypnotic loop. I'll link it to this video. That's something that I really recommend you go ahead and watch. But essentially, it's the way that we create our storylines, our imaginations, our personas about ourselves. How we create storylines and identities about ourselves and what we mean to the world and what the world means to us. An example being, if we were really successful at sports in high school or secondary school, then that can be the primary identity that we relate to the world. And then when we get an injury or we don't make it pro or we don't do well in a competition, then that can be really devastating for us because our whole identity, our whole life is made around that, because all of our experiences is made around that. All of our beliefs about ourselves is made through the sporting event. All of the way that we talk to ourselves and our imagination is made about that, right? That's what we mean by creating this identity. So if you're a successful guy who also identifies as smart, then you probably had certain experiences that's made you feel that way. Probably did pretty well in school. You probably beat a lot of the odds, or you might have had favorable odds to begin with, and you beat even those. So you might become even more successful than people thought you were going to be, and they still predicted that you'd be successful. So it's real success is what I'm trying to say here. You're not gaslighting yourself into thinking you're smart and success. There's actually like real experiences on the table, which is like, damn, I've actually done pretty well for myself. This is how people from my family have come from, and this is where I am right now. So super brief over the hypnotic loop. Experience shapes beliefs, beliefs shape imagination. Imagination is self-talk, it's self-image, it's self-worth, it's our person, it's like the persona of Aaron, everything that's happening in the mind. So this mind that's constantly chattering away, this is the persona of Aaron. This is like little Aaron. That's what I like to call him, right? It's not big Aaron. And in imagination, it shapes our physiology. This is why psychophysiology is such a big thing. It's why they're not separate. It's why I don't view the mind and body as separate. I also get that from my Dharma practices, because how we think about ourselves actively shapes how we move in the world. Like I recently just saw a guy in the elevator of the building I'm living in, and he was wearing a mask, and everything in his energy was like closed off and shaped off like that. And that affects his experience of the world, because when we move our shoulders down like this, it makes us seem smaller, and people treat us like that. They treat us as something smaller, and then that reinforces the experience that we're having, which makes us more likely to act like that, to act small, which is actually quite cruel if you think about it, if it wasn't neutral, because it means that when things are going really well, they go really well. But when things are going bad, unless you have the tools to stop it, it just keeps on getting worse. You can't just brush it under the rug, because that pile of dust that you're brushing under the rug doesn't just stay the same, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then physiology, like I said, it flows into experience of the world. And it's not just physiology, it's all of the other factors behind it. So our physiology, our imagination, the way we think about ourselves and our beliefs, what we believe about ourselves, all of those shapes our experience of the world. And if all of those things work together, then it can create an amazing experience of the world. And it makes us so confident, it makes us super grounded, it makes us unshakable, it makes us able to take risks, it makes us able to tap into the wisest part of us rather than just the loudest. It makes us be able to do all of that kind of stuff. But if there's something that's out of alignment there, then it can actually make us either not go into that or go into something that's a downward spiral. So this is essentially how we manifest and co-create the world around us. And then whatever we like to attach, and then whatever we like, we usually attach ourselves to that, right? So if what I've seen with a lot of my clients that are smart and successful is they like the fact that they're smart and successful, so they attach themselves to those things. Nothing wrong with that inherently. The problem comes later, which is what we're going to get into for the rest of the video. When you have to be a novice at something again, when you have to be a beginner at something again, you have to really be a beginner. You can't have this kind of smart, successful ego that you bring into this new thing. So with a lot of my clients, it's in the social realm, not just dating and relationships, but like actual like social realm, like being with friends, how they show up in the group, how they be a bit more of a leader, all of that stuff. A lot of the time they either overcompensate or they don't feel fully comfortable because there's a clear discrepancy between how confident they feel in this area of their life versus other areas of their life. Okay. And that's how we're going to get into how we can actually leverage this first. Because if you've had all of this success, if you're actually genuinely a smart person, then that's not something that we want to just disregard just for the fun of it. We want to actually see how much we can leverage that. So this is a breadth work practice. Okay. So this is when we think about and we try to embody what traits, mannerisms, behaviors, beliefs are just inherent within all things that is useful for all of it, right? What can I translate from my areas of excellence into the areas which I'm still a novice and a beginner at? This requires creative thinking in something called the creative faculty. How you can map that is like the creative part of your brain, which I believe is the right brain hemisphere, although the recent science on this suggests that we use both hemispheres at the same time, continuously. But the creative faculty is where there's a lot of space, there's a lot of playfulness. It's not a hard-headed analytical mind, okay? So what this means is a lot of the people that have had success or identify as smart, they're used to problem solving in a very analytical, step-by-step, systematic way. This is not going to get you what you want, okay? In order to be able to bring our traits and our resources from different areas to the areas that we're struggling with, is we need to have creativity, which is why I bring this up. So you can map it down, you can write it out, you can journal, you can do all of that kind of stuff. And I suggest that you do it. And don't be too focused on having it super organized or being super accurate. Whenever we're being super critical, it kills any kind of creativity, it kills any kind of resource linking. And then once you've mapped everything out, you just leave and you do something that you enjoy. You do something fun, because it's in that space that processing can happen. A lot of the time with breakthroughs with one-on-one clients is they have a big breakthrough on the call, and then they do a special embodiment practice, which I give them, which allows them to basically 10x all of the breakthroughs that they have on call to their area of life. It's a specific practice. But I also say to them, go and do something fun. Take your mind off of it. Because the more that we try and think about it and try and solidify the change, it's like holding on to water. It just keeps on slipping out. Because that's a critical mind. And when we've just had a breakthrough with the critical mind, it kind of wants to keep homeostasis. It's not like evil or anything like that. Just the critical mind, it wants to keep things in check. It's like if you ever speak to somebody who's a real contrarian or really plays devil's advocate, they're not very open to a change, whether it's a small change or a big change. What they're much more interested in is challenging the accuracy of something, which makes it much harder for new information to come in. And also it's a bias as well. It's a bias to be like, this is always the logical thing to do when it's not always the logical thing to do. For example, one of my guys or one of my clients used to be in tech and now exited and now started to be a founder in his own startup. He had a very grounded and relaxed energy, but it wasn't necessarily the most powerful. And he couldn't fully translate it into dating, socializing, connections, all that kind of stuff, right? And even around his male friends too. Like there was a real lack of embodiment in that power. And once we did this breath practice, once we saw how there were so many connections in the work that he did, not in tech, although that was a useful part of him too, but in the reparenting stuff that he'd done, in the therapists he'd worked with, all of that kind of thing, what we did is we enabled him to bring his power, because he was a very powerful person. He was able to live life on his own terms, basically. He just had to realize that. And we're able to do that through this breath practice. Those of you that are really interested in that, what I recommend is actually my free practical shadow work guide, which is in the link below. That will get rid of blocks and barriers, stopping you from accessing resources through shadows, right? The shadows are introjections, projections are split ego states. It's a 2.5-hour training. It was with my one-on-one clients on the live stream. Something that I was originally going to charge for, but I made it free. If you download that, it will change this area of your life. It will stop you from holding back in certain areas of your life through insecurity. A lot of the time we can't do this breath practice because we have a belief that one thing is harder than the other. I used to have this a lot when it came to dating and relationships. I used to think that this was the hardest arena ever, socializing. And whilst it was very hard for me, having that belief was like having a top-down principle that was making stuff harder than it should have been. And I missed out on a ton of opportunities. It took me way longer than it should have. And I don't want that to happen to you. So go ahead and download my free guide. So now what we have to do is drop the rest of the ego. We're not killing it. We're not getting rid of it. We're just dropping the subtle sense of superiority and arrogance that can happen when we identify as a smart, successful person, okay? Maybe this isn't you. And if that isn't you, then great. And I would say that you're probably the exception to that rule, because it's not out of maliciousness, it's not out of narcissism, it's not out of egoism. It's just because if somebody's had an experience of life where they've overcome so many different barriers, they've overcome so many different things holding them back, whether it's family, whether it's socioeconomic status, can even be race. Sadly, we do live in the world which is kind of, that affects in a lot of places. It could be in a number of different ways. We can have a certain feeling that, we shouldn't have to be a beginner at this. We shouldn't have to be humble when it comes to dating. Dating is a big one for guys, for whatever reason. I know the reason, because there's a lot of psychology, and there's a lot of interjections that are fed to us that dating has something to do with our masculinity and how we are as men. But it can also happen socially as well. Like, we should be like a dominant leader, that kind of thing. Like we shouldn't, there's almost like whenever you feel like, do I really have to be a beginner again? The answer is yes, because that's the most effective and the fastest way to become competent in something. We have an ego when we have a pedestalization of our success. We're putting it on a pedestalization rather than just seeing it as something that we can appreciate, but something that doesn't fundamentally change our value as a person. The moment we make success a key contributor in our value or our worth as a person is the moment that our value, our worth, our confidence becomes completely flimsy. Because whenever we put it to something external, it means that that's shakeable so easily. It's so easily shakeable. This is the massive fallacy that people have, right? You think that, if I just do the right things, X, then that's just like sensible and, that's just how the world is, and that's how I can base my confidence. And on some level, it's correct, right? I can understand, I can really see that point of view. I used to have that point of view too. But the moment you make something internal, your worth, your value, your confidence, this is an internal state. It's subtle. You can't measure that, right? This is not something objective, okay? This is something which a monkey on the rock that's flying around the planet believes about himself. Okay, it's completely fictitious if you want to look at it from that way. So, but when you try and tie that to something that's externally objective, first of all, it makes completely zero sense. Second of all, it means that all of your eggs are placed in one basket. So the moment something is kind of slippery there, the moment there's a little chink in that armor, the moment somebody gives you a little bit of shit, in front of a prospective client, or in front of a woman that you're interested in, or in front of your friend group, is the moment that that identity just breaks down. Instead, it needs to come from you, right? Which is why we need to drop that pedestalization of being smart, being successful, being whatever means something about ourselves, makes something special about ourselves, okay? We need to have a true horizontal attitude. That's the best way I've ever heard it described, and it comes from one of my mentors, Pierre de Souza, in one of his principles of communication. It's seeing the other person as a true equal whilst working together to a true horizon. AKA being okay with being seen as a little bit silly, being seen as a little bit foolish, being seen as a beginner, being seen as a novice, being seen as somebody who's not fully competent. If you embrace that mindset, you will stop living in your own head and you'll actually start living in the world the way that you want to. It might not be in the way you idealized, but it will be in the way that you want to. And funnily enough, when you start living life this way, you have all of these ideas in your head about like how, oh, I want to be the super smooth guy. But then the way that you actually end up living is 10 times better than how you imagined, because it's so much more alive. It's so much more you, rather than just playing a character that you saw that you thought would be cool in a movie or something like that. An example on my own journey is because I've done so much work on myself, I had a very subtle like talking down to people. It wasn't from a place of maliciousness. It wasn't from a place of narcissism. It wasn't from a place of egocentricity, which is the same for a lot of people watching this. It was just because I'd done so much and I put in so much work that I kind of felt like I had the right to talk down, as silly as that seems, you know? So what it did is it actually isolated me from the mature, really cool people that could see that, because they just get turned off from that behavior. And also it's made such a massive barrier between me and doing something that I wanted to do, because I didn't want to be seen as a failure, as someone who didn't know what he was doing, as a loser, as someone who was just trying something new, because I built that subtle arrogance, that subtle pedestalization of myself, right? And when I dropped that, that's when I was able to actually start working a lot more and putting myself out there a lot more, because I wasn't concerned about what other people thought about me. Not because their opinion didn't matter, but just because I was very confident in myself. And it was a real confidence. It wasn't like a shadow-based confidence. This attitude keeps you trapped because you're constantly trying to live up and reach an impossible standard. And then when you reach that impossible standard, you move the goalpost, and then there's another impossible standard that you have to live up to. Right? Sound familiar? And this standard, not only does it not even exist, but it's not even you. Like an example for that is just because you made a bunch of money, or just because you've done the job, or you've overcome some hard things in life, doesn't mean that you're attractive, or doesn't mean that you're socially, doesn't mean that you're confident. That's stuff that you have to learn separately. That's stuff that you have to expose yourself to. The reason why you can be confident in those situations, why you can be okay in the chaos of letting the chips fall as you may, is because you've really been in those situations where that's happened to you and you've been fine, right? And that comes from stopping living in your head and actually going out there and moving. But it has to come from dropping the pedestalization of how you're pedestalizing yourself. If you want more information about how you can go into your unconscious and heal those unconscious insecurities and those ways of looking, like that pedestalization of yourself, the reason why you pedestalize yourself with success and all the experience and being smart, most likely is because there's an insecurity that's causing that. There's an overcompensation. The best thing that I've seen on the internet for free is my free shadow work guide. Like I said, 2.5 hours, originally a live stream with my one-on-one clients. Go ahead, download it. It will change your life. So now we get into the fun stuff, or we get into the actual showing up practice, which is the framework of what this looks like day to day. We need to go internal first. That's what all of these points were up until this. You need to watch what arises for you, your natural impulses, and then follow them. So let's slow down for a minute. If you're living life in your own head, then you are internal, but that internal is just up here. Instead, we want to put an internal awareness on the whole body, our mind included, okay? And what you'll realize when you're being social, when you're at home even, and maybe you want to focus on founding something or starting something new, whatever it is from this field of awareness, you just have like impulses that arise for you. Like, oh, I wonder what that is. And that can be something like a hobby, that can be trying a new drink, it can be starting a new business, it can be whatever, okay? It can go from all the way from something that's meaningless to really meaningful, if you want to phrase it in that polarity. And what you need to get better at is following those impulses. And if you go internal, if your full awareness is on yourself, then you don't actually have time to check in with the external surroundings. And it's checking in with the external surroundings, almost like a constant echolocation of where you are and how you stand in the outside world. That's the thing that's keeping you stifled as well. Alongside all of the other internal stuff we talked about, there's also the external part, which is the constant checking in, the constant perception management, the constant, oh, if I say this, am I going to get validation? That's the thing that's making you live more in your own head than in real life. And if we put all of our focus on the internal, we don't have time to check in with that. And then if we follow impulses, then we can actually express what's authentically coming up for us. Now, I go into this in much, much more detail in another video called Self-Validation Masterclass. I'll link it too. And that will teach you the whole system of what I do with my one-on-one clients. But that's the basic overview, okay? The key mindsets are embracing the chaos, letting the chips fall as they may, Zen mind, beginner mind. Those are the key mindsets. The other one, the other overall attitude, which will be really valuable for you, is bringing humility into day-to-day interactions. Really being like, wow, like I actually am the person that's lived more in my head than in real life. So I am starting as a beginner. That's the humility. It's not talking down on yourself. It's not holding yourself in the unconditional loving witness. It's just having a real humbleness. Like, okay, this is where I am. I promise you, when you embrace that, the trigger to actually go and be a bit more social, be a bit more outgoing, be a bit more confident is so much shorter. Like I said, the tech guy that turned into a founder, right? He had to realize that people didn't necessarily know that he'd done all of that work on himself, that he'd been in self-development, he'd been in self-improvement, he'd made all that money. People didn't necessarily know about that, and they didn't necessarily care about that. So instead, when he met people when they were at, when he didn't think that people should treat him a certain way because of all of that success, that's when he was able to actually start being more social. He was able to be more respected. He's getting clients now just from living in kind of a co-living place where people are just attracted to his grounded warmth and powerful energy, his presence, right? Just the presence work. That's the difference. Whereas before he was living in the exact same place, before we went on retreat and we done a few one-on-one and we done some one-on-one work together, people didn't have that same interaction with him. Now people are actually asking him about what his business is and how they can start working with him. That's how powerful this practice can be, is that you can actually show up in such a different way that people treat you as an entirely different person.